everything that Maori had was completely rubbished by the new settlers. There was no need to cry for your dead, for a start. You do not do that. I mean, these Maoris sleeping all together and having carvings on your meeting house. How unchristian. You cannot have a tickle with a penis in the front of it. Where do you have a penis? Right? Do you have a penis at the back?
Sometimes the Crown set out to destroy Maori structures. And with hindsight, that was bad. At the time, they thought it was probably good. And we followed assimilationist policies, as they have in Canada and America and everywhere else. We followed those for over 100 years. Nobody actually asked Maori people if they'd like to be assimilated into the other culture, but anyway, we thought it was good for them.
The idea was we had to turn these natives into Pākehās, into British subjects. We've got to turn them away from their values because they're no good, because they want to share everything equally amongst themselves. And that's not right. That's not British.
Many of the claims are all the same. Our lands went through the native land court, they came out, they were individualised, they'd gone within a couple of weeks, and we've got nothing, never have had since. And so for the Crown to establish the native land court to destroy our structures like that, individualise our communally owned property, was outrageous and facilitated the sale and the alienation of the lands.
So 10 names went on the title, 10 people became individualised owners, which was completely and utterly and completely wrong. It was a sin of huge proportions that those 10 people can take the right of all the rest of the hapu. Well, in 1911 they planned to put a sewer outfall in Ōkahu Bay, when 1 year earlier the Stout Nutter Commission declared that this land should remain in Maori ownership forever. Now we're standing on the sewer pipe, which is under this road, which actually was built against the wishes of the local tangata whenua, this edifice to stupidity. Our fishing beds were ruined, and every winter from 1912, the village was flooded out.
Suddenly it was a health hazard. Why? Because of the sewage that was caused from this road, this flash road. Just get the Maoris off, get this eyesore out of the way.
After 1912 or thereabouts, there was another concerted push to mop up the remaining bits of Māori land. What the government did was to make sure that they paid only a low price. No private purchaser could deal with Māori here, only the government could.
The government bahas would arrive at the house of an old lady who had about 5 acres, and then they would talk and cajole her and point out to her that she didn't need 5 acres. All she needed was the plot around her house and a garden for her sustenance. And because they importuned and pressed her, in the end she gave in.
The strong message really was sell up and get out, because we don't really want a Māori suburb right in the middle of Auckland. This is the front door to New Zealand. People sail down in the harbour in their ships, and what do? They see this eyesore on the harbour's edge.
They indulged in irregular tactics like live buying from individuals, and none of the other members of the hapu, of the tribe, knew that this was happening, and they thought the land was intact. Normally, if you buy land from someone, it has defined boundaries, there are pegs for it, and everyone can see that a transaction has taken place. There are documents, but there were no documents, there were no boundary pegs, there was continuous live buying until in the end all the land was bought from under Ngāti Whātua's feet.
The government acknowledged that pre-1865 through the Maori Land Court that the methodology surrounding those sales were at best dodgy and at worst out-and-out theft.
This is our home down here. Our tupuna lived here. They ran and played, and we ran and played here. We had Sunday school here, where this beautiful church now stands. Used to be this old church, and it had holes in it. And when I was a kid, and bird poop was on the chairs, and the chairs we could hardly stand up, but we used to run here because we knew it was ours. This area here was where our marae, Aotea, and Te Puru o Tāmaki, our whare nui was, whare tūpuna was, just over there. And where those men are practising now, that's where the mara all the gardens used to be. And each family had their own plot.
I was taken there as a student in 1950, and that's when I saw how impoverished the people were, how decrepit the houses were, and how much on the margins these people lived in Auckland, in a city of affluence and plenty.
They wouldn't give us any running water inside the village. They wouldn't give us internal sewage in the village. They wouldn't give us permits to rebuild and to remodernise our houses.
The Maori boys, the kiddies, would come down and swim here and dig for shellfish, and the yachties that were here respected the Maoris' sort of rights to the beach. And if you wanted to tie a boat up there, you were supposed to ask permission of an adult. Otherwise, there was a chance that if you tied your boat up to one of those putakawas, the boat would drift.
But the government was intent on making sure that the last remaining Ngāti Whātua were moved, and finally they did it by two actions. One was building some new state houses explicitly for Māori in Kirimoana Street, and the other was using the Public Works Act to compulsorily acquire the remaining bits of Māori land.
Once the people were taken off that area, willing or unwilling, they would be housed here. But they had to measure up to the qualifications. First of all, you had to be good people and not be troublemakers. To come into a brand new state advanced house where you pull down a switch and on goes the light. When you have hot and cold water running, we have a flush toilet. So we were told it was a privileged position.
They still call it Boot Hill, I think. Some of the people around here call themselves the Boot Hill Boys and so on. It used to be written on the graffiti on the buses going into town when I used to catch the bus to university. So Boot Hill, they were booted up the hill to Kirimoana Street. So they became tenants living on their own ancestral land.
The government of that blinking day said, get off there, you Maoris. Get off where? This is our land, man. This is our land. Where else in the world do people get away with kicking people off their own home, off their own land? Well, it happened in New Zealand.
I was up on the orchard where our parents lived and we lived. Where that gazebo is probably where I stood up on the fruit tree. And I looked down to the back of the marae and I said to my father, I said, Dad, there's a house on fire. And right down the back by Kirimoana Street, there was these three whares that were burning simultaneously.
I was doing a lot of major work on my boat, and the smoke was coming across the road at sort of sundown, and it was white and there was a great pall of it, and the buses had to slow down through it.
And we saw the helmeted workers coming up with their torches, and I looked and I couldn't believe these buggers were coming up to torch my house. I'd seen them torch all the rest of the marae, but no way were they going to come up to ours. Certainly they did. They had their piece of paper and who was going to be burned out and who not going to be burned out. It was just like a military seizure. If you obstruct us, we'll just push you out of the way.
I can remember to this day the wailing of the women and the younger people, and it was really heartrending.
When they started to burn the two houses, right, I was in the centre of it. I knew it was my turn coming next. So I stayed there on the last day when they started to dismantle the place. Of course, my wife and children started to cry. So I thought, well, I'll have to give into this. So I made up my mind to move to Kirimoana.
I'll never ever let